In 2015, the city of Fort Smith entered into what is known as a consent decree with the United States Department of Justice, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Arkansas Division of Environmental Quality, agreeing to repair and upgrade its sewer systems after decades of sewage runoff into local waterways, including the Arkansas River. As the city has worked to meet its obligations under the agreement, it has increased sewer rates, hired additional utility department employees, and extended sales taxes to help fund the work. In fact, voters will decide in May if they want to extend sales tax again, this time through 2059, to pay for the consent decree work. However, for many Fort Smith residents, the bigger question is, what even is a consent decree anyway? How did Fort Smith find itself in the middle of one? And what comes next? This is Unpacking the Issue. A consent decree sounds super legal, and that's because it is. A consent decree is a binding and enforceable agreement between opposing parties in litigation that is approved by a judge, according to Cornell Law School. So a consent decree can't be appealed, unless it comes about as a result of fraud, or if both parties erred in some way making the deal. It basically says, you've been doing something wrong, and this is how you're going to fix it, without going to trial. They're often used when it comes to things like antitrust, securities, and in Fort Smith's case, environmental law. When the government sues an entity, it allows that entity to stop its illegal conduct and take any necessary corrective actions so that the government will not pursue the case further. Back in 2015, the Fort Smith consent decree was filed and approved by a federal judge, setting out repairs and improvements the city needed to make to its sanitary sewer system and penalties the federal government could assess against the city for missing deadlines. The agreement came about after the city had been dealing with sewer system problems for decades. The federal government said that the city was violating the Clean Water Act and its discharge permit in 6 major ways. 1. Unpermitted discharges of pollutants into the Arkansas River. 2. Violation of proper operations and maintenance provisions of the Clean Water Act. 3. Failures to minimize or prevent unlawful sewage discharges. 4. Exceeding pollution limits of the wastewater discharge into the river from the city's 2 treatment plants. 5. Violation of the sanitary sewer overflow reporting requirements. And 6. Failure to implement safeguards against unlawful sewage discharge during power failures. For years, decades actually, raw sewage was leaking into rivers and creeks, including the Arkansas River. From 2004 through 2014, Fort Smith released raw sewage more than 2,000 times, dumping more than 119 gallons of untreated wastewater into the waterways, according to the United States Department of Justice. Federal officials argued that the impact of those actions was poor water quality and endangering public health. However, this is not to say that Fort Smith was not aware of these things and making changes to their sewer system already. Within the 8 to 10 years before the decree was filed, the city of Fort Smith had spent over $200 million trying to bring its wastewater system into compliance with the Clean Water Act and its permits for discharging into the Arkansas River. But according to the EPA and the Department of Justice, those efforts just weren't enough. The city was originally expected to finish consent decree work within 12 years at an estimated cost of $48 million, a cost that city officials today say was vastly underestimated.
Some estimates put the work at $800 million of work. We're putting this on the backs of our citizens who have an average household income of less than $53,000 a year, and that's not individual income, that's household income.
Among other things under the decree, the city needs to update its 2 wastewater treatment plants, assess and correct defects in the sewage collection system, and increase its capacity, set up a system maintenance program, and begin a repair program for private sewer lines. The federal government requires the city to inspect its 500 miles of sewer lines and 12,000 manholes every 8 years under the agreement. One of the bigger issues that Fort Smith has had to contend with when it comes to meeting its obligations under the consent decree has been how to pay for it. The city has implemented the following to pay for the work, including increasing sewer rates by 60% in April of 2015, authorizing a $33.6 million bond issued in November of 2015, allotting $15 million of the $21.2 million the city received in American Rescue Plan Act for consent decree work in July of 2022, and increasing water rates in August of 2024, anticipating to raise the bill for the average user by approximately $2 per month. Additionally, in May of 2022, Fort Smith voters approved extensions to a 0.75 sales tax that was originally approved in 2012, with some of that money set to go towards sewer system repairs. In February of this year, the Board of Directors approved setting a May 13 special election, during which voters will be asked to extend a 0.75% tax and another 1% city sales tax from their current end dates of December 31st, 2030 until December 31st, 2059. If approved by voters, 83.3% of the 0.75% sales tax will go towards improvements to the sewer system, and 37.5% of the 1% tax will go towards sewer improvements and consent decree purposes, as well as repaying and securing bonds issued to finance improvements for such purposes. Also this past February, the board voted to increase sewer rates by 3.5% starting June 1st, and the rate will continue to increase by 3.5% each year through 2030. Even with all the funding to pay for the work, city officials still say that they need more time in order to actually get the work done. When the consent decree was filed, it was said that the city had 12 years to complete its work, meaning that it had an original deadline of January 2nd, 2027. A deadline that some city officials recently told the River Valley Democrat-Gazette was out of the ordinary for this kind of agreement.
To have 12 years to do a consent decree was lower than most any city in the United States, and would really, I think, was an extremely difficult burden to put on the city. So I think from the beginning, the time allowed in the contract that the city signed with the federal government in early 2015 was not adequate to get the work done.
The city definitely needs more time. If you think about it, we still have pipes that we just discovered at the end of last year that has to go through design process. Some of these capacity projects like the Mazard wet weather is going to take about 18 months to design, and then you have to construct it, and you're talking about very large projects. So with the amount of work that's to be done, we need the time for the design and the construction. That's really where we're sitting at.
Even if the project was possible under the original timeline, two huge extreme circumstances threw a wrench in the city's plan: the Arkansas River flood of 2019 and the COVID-19 pandemic. The flood occurred in spring of 2019, breaking several high water records in the state and proving to be one of the most expensive natural disasters in state history, according to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. Among other things, the flood damaged wastewater infrastructure in the city. Because of the damage, the utility department began bypassing pump station number 6 after the flood. Then, in March of 2020, came COVID-19, which pretty much brought everything to a halt. Contractors stopped working, and projects got delayed.
I think until we ran into the flood in 2019 and COVID in 2020, we were pretty much on schedule with consent decree work, but those two things back to back really cut down the amount of construction we could do because of the damage from the flood. And because COVID, you really couldn't hire contractors during the 3 years there. So we didn't get much done, so we fell way behind. So, and we're now trying to catch up, but that's very difficult.
In April of 2020, Fort Smith officials filed a letter saying both the flood and the pandemic were beyond its control, and that the city needed some sort of relief for meeting its obligations under the decree. In May of 2020, the EPA and the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality agreed the city had demonstrated its sewer improvement program would be inordinately expensive, and qualified for a 5-year extension for the original 12-year deadline, giving the city until 2032 to get the work done. Though the extension is just a handshake agreement, according to city spokesman Bushfink, who said there's nothing official in writing that says that the city has more than January 2nd, 2027 to complete its work. Even then, city officials say that they still need even more time beyond 2032. In September of 2024, the board approved a resolution allowing city officials to negotiate with federal and state officials, seeking to push the end date to the consent decree work from 2032 to 2036. The city's been working, no doubt. From upgrading treatment plants to inspecting lines, there has been progress. But according to Water Utilities Director Lance McAvery, the bulk of the work is yet to be done.
Even if we had not had the flood in 2019, COVID, historic, I still think it would probably have been a very, very ambitious schedule to complete this by the end of 2026. Just because we didn't know how bad the system was until we got into it. Now that we know, we're able to go into a more strategic and tactical planning stage of saying we're going to address these 4s and 5s, which will eliminate this sanitary sewer overflow. These 4s and 5s we're going to do in a couple of years because they're really not that bad, and they're not causing an overflow. So a lot of that is going into some matrix analysis that we're doing that have been used successfully in other consent decrees.
Rarely a month goes by that the River Valley Democrat-Gazette does not have some story about the work being approved by the board of directors. For instance, directors early in April approved 3 design agreements with the firm Hawkins Ware, totaling $407,450, $188,750, and $227,950 respectively. The project involves reviewing line segments and manholes included in the original decree, and seeing if changes are needed to the original plans and specifications. In an interview with the River Valley Democrat-Gazette, Utilities Director Lance McAvery spoke about the recent projects that are being completed under the consent decree.
Our 2 largest projects that we've done were capacity projects. One was in Basin P002 and P003, which is near the P Street wastewater plant, and the other was known as Basin 10 and 14, Phase 1, that was actually over by Martin Luther King Park. And what these projects did were greatly increase the size of the sewer lines that are underground. And we had to do that by basically what's called open cut, and that's where we dig up what existed, put in brand new pipe, and then rebury that pipe.
Fort Smith officials say that recent discussions with federal and state officials have given them hope that they can work with their federal and state counterparts to find solutions as consent decree work continues to arise.
I will say that working with DEQ and DOJ, EPA, I've noticed a sense of collaborative solution finding as opposed to stick instead of a carrot type situation. Looking at how do we sit down at the table and work together to find that solution, whether it be more time, different ways of doing things. It really has been kind of nice working with several of them from both, of course, Little Rock, and then you have our Region 6 people as well as those in Washington who have taken the time to really look at in depth at where we're at and see what we're proposing, and actually some of our proposals they've even said are kind of refreshing and really revolutionary in how we're looking at doing things. So I think we're headed the right direction. We just need to get past that last step.
Katzevitz, meanwhile, says that with the new presidential administration and a new EPA director, Lee Zeldin, the city has the opportunity to build better relationships with federal officials as they work to meet obligations under the consent decree.
With the new presidential administration, we have an opportunity with the new director. Lee Zeldin is now the director of the EPA. The Region 6 director is someone who is fairly local to our area. So I think that there are opportunities for relationship building.
We reached out to the EPA and the ADEQ for comment. The ADEQ responded via email saying this: extension of the final compliance date for the sewer infrastructure improvements will allow a more realistic implementation schedule and additional funding options, such as the sales and use tax extension to support the sanitary sewer collection system improvements. The work completed by the City of Fort Smith from 2015 through 2023 has reduced the number of sanitary sewer overflow events by approximately 55%, and the city has identified and planned sanitary sewer collection system projects to further eliminate sanitary sewer overflow events. The EPA responded via email saying only, EPA cannot comment on potential or ongoing enforcement discussions. So whether the deadline is 2032 or 2036, when all the work has been completed under the consent decree, will residents expect sewer and water rates to go back down? City officials say that that prospect is doubtful.
I don't think it's going to be reasonable for any municipality to ever reduce rates, simply because inflation. Now, would a city like Fort Smith be required to continue raising rates at the rate at which they would do it under a consent decree? Probably not. But some of this may be bonded, so we have bond payments that would be paid out over 20 years. Depending upon when those were issued, we would still have to make those bond payments plus keep everything running. So in the short term, I would say no. possibly get to the point where, okay, for several years you drop down to a 1% or no percent rate increase. That might be doable, but to just say that, oh, we're going to go back to what the rates were in 2015 before the rates went up, inflation alone took that out.
There's still a long journey to go when it comes to the consent decree, and there's still plenty to do. Whether it be attending board meetings or covering the upcoming special election, the River Valley Democrat-Gazette will do its best to keep its readers informed of issues surrounding the consent decree. To stay up to date on this issue, visit us at rivervalleydemocratgazette.com/consent decree, where we're always hard at work unpacking the issue.